want to call the East Greenbush Central School District's Board of Education meeting for July 28th to order. Attendance this evening, we have all members present except for Mr. Mann and Mr. Yaboa at this point. So with that, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So during the summertime, we do not have our student council. I'll see them probably later in August or early September. The next item for business is the minutes. So we have several minutes. The draft minutes for the special meeting for June 29th. All members present except for Frank at that meeting. So any changes or corrections to the minutes on June 29th? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve the minutes. Kathleen, a second. Deanna, all those in favor? Approved. So we have the organizational meeting from July 13th. Board members present except for Michelle. Any questions, revisions, or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve that. Joanne, a second. Cheryl, all those in favor? Hey, Mark. And the draft minutes for the regular meeting for July 13th. Any questions, comments, revisions? Seeing none, need a motion to approve that. John, I need a second. Anyone? Kathleen, all those in favor? Approved. Abstaining? Michelle? Great, you're abstaining, so good. Got it. Okay, moving on, we have the board forum. First board forum this evening. We have a second one later this evening. We'll start on my left with Cheryl. Anything, Ms. Cheryl? Nothing? Michelle, you're good? John? Nothing? Mark's good? Deanna, anything? Okay. Kathleen is good. And Joanne, you're good. So a lot of our board members typically will say something after the meeting towards the second board forum as we go through board business. So I'll reserve comment as well. So the next item is our first public forum. Residents, students, employees, and business representatives of the East Greenbush Central School District may address the board on matters concerning programs and/or operations of the district other than matters involving personnel. Members of the board do not directly respond to citizen concerns in the public forum. If a response is appropriate, either the president or superintendent will contact the individual in the near future. Those persons wishing to address the board will be recognized by the chair of the meeting and should state for the record their name and address or affiliation with the district or business. While the board does not wish to infringe upon free speech protections, it must be stressed that the visitors forum is not deemed to be an open forum. The board president will conduct the forum for the orderly and efficient operation of board business. In addition, any remarks which may be considered defamatory or stigmatizing are prohibited and will be declared out of order. All comment shall be limited to 5 minutes. So it's good to have people back in business. And has anyone like to address the board? No? Okay. Next, we have reports and presentation to the superintendent.
I have no formal presentations. I'll reserve my comments for the discussion items.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Simons. Moving on, we have the discussion items. The first item is the code of conduct for 21-22. Who's going to take the lead on that?
Okay, thank you,
Marissa
Mr.
Cannon
Dino.
do that. Yep.
Ms. Cannon? Okay.
So the code of conduct is reviewed annually by a committee. We review this annually to strengthen our code and look at areas that are in need of improvement. So we have several areas where we'd like to make modifications. The first is coming from our Committee on Global Awareness. We talked a lot about inclusiveness and equity and recognizing other cultures. So in our introduction section, it's important to note that one of the expectations is being inclusive. So we'd like to add the word inclusiveness to the expectation in the introduction section. The second component is we currently have a definition for what is a weapon. We met with our SRO and he advised that we should add chemical agents, air gun, and automatic gun to the weapon definition. Under student responsibilities, and again, this came from the Global Awareness Committee, we would like to add the following responsibility to student responsibilities, and that is to be inclusive and collaborative. Student dress code, we'd like to modify one of the items to include the reflection of religious and cultural purpose. So if a child is wearing something to reflect that, that would be permissible. We additionally need to add a section on safety and health. This past year during our pandemic, we just want to make note that all district staff, students, and visitors are expected to follow pandemic and/or communicable disease safety and health protocols. Under behavioral expectations for grades 9 through 12, there's currently a violation listed as parking on school grounds without a permit and reckless driving on school property. We feel that it's most appropriate to separate those into two distinct violations, one being parking on school grounds without a permit with a list of consequences, and then the second violation being reckless driving on school property with its own consequences. Under behavioral expectations, also for grades 9-12, there's currently a section indicating possession, use, or distribution of tobacco products. Our committee talked about this in depth. We feel that it's most appropriate to, again, break that violation down into two categories, one being possession and use, and then distribution being a separate violation with a separate range of consequences. Under the behavioral expectations for grades K-8 and 9-12, there's student dress violations. We just want to add language to reference our student dress code on page 9. And then lastly, in the behavioral expectations in the infractions, we just want to update possession of a weapon to now reflect our new modified definition of what is a weapon. So what I'm asking is the board to review this and also open it up for public comment. And I'd like at the next meeting on August 11th to move forward with potential approval. Does anyone have any questions about the modifications? Okay, thank you.
I would only add that New York State Education Department regulations require an annual review and update of the code of conduct. Doesn't mean we have to change anything necessarily, but we do have a committee that annually looks at the code of conduct and makes any suggested changes and revisions.
Thank you.
So no comments or questions in terms of the code of conduct this time? If you do come across something and you want to get it to Marissa and the team, we appreciate it. We appreciate the work of the committee to update that. It's a long process and it was very thorough. Thanks for all the updates. The next item for discussion is any updates for planning for the fall 2021 and New York State guidance or lack of guidance?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Buono.
Okay.
So as of this evening, school districts in New York State have not received any formal written guidance from either the New York State Education Department or the New York State Department of Health or the governor's office directly. We are close to the end of July. We are starting to get inquiries and questions from parents regarding expectations for September. At the last meeting, I reported that all of the superintendents and the district superintendents of the 4 BOCES within this region communicated the urgency to Dr. Zucker, Commissioner of Health, to get the guidance in place so that we could plan. Additionally, the legislators representing the districts within the 4 BOCES region wrote a similar letter advocating for timely guidance. Over the course of this past week and really starting last week, there have been a number of media reports regarding some of the issues that were being reviewed by the CDC. One of the things that we have pointed out at our board meetings really since the spring of 2020 was that in some cases, New York State chooses to follow the CDC guidance. In other cases, they make modifications. So we can't necessarily translate what came out this week from the CDC to the schools. We have to wait for our governing bodies, the New York State Education Department and the New York State Department of Health, to let us know what the rules and protocols are going to be for September. However, the CDC guidance that came out yesterday indicated that in certain circumstances, people, including adults and children, should wear masks, even when vaccinated. I expect that that will be a topic of conversation and concern and varying views between now and September. How that will fold into the guidance, we don't know. So certain circumstances would mean if we are in a area of community transmission that is considered to be high or substantial by CDC measures. Currently, thankfully, while the infection rate is going up in Rensselaer County, we are considered to be at a moderate level. Right? If you recall, the guidance last year indicated that at the middle school and the high school level, there were different constraints, additional constraints on how we could organize the students cohorting when we were in a substantial or a higher risk level. We're not at that classification right now, although the low that I'm aware of was 0.3. It's now up to 2.4 or in that mid 2 range, primarily due to, in conversations with the County Department of Health director, the Delta variant. One of the things that Mary Fran Wakunis, who is the Director of Health, pointed out to us in a meeting this week was that in some cases, the additional cases are not people that are symptomatic. They're going in for some other medical procedure and they're tested as a matter of the protocol and they find out that they are COVID positive, even if they're vaccinated. About 55% of the newer cases in the county, as I recall, are people who are vaccinated. So that is a concern, and that is something that we're going to have to see how it folds out into the guidance. One of the things we discussed today among superintendents in Rensselaer County with Craig Hansen, who is our Questar Director of Health and Safety, who has served as a facilitator of discussions across the district, as well as an intermediary between the county departments of health for Rensselaer County, Columbia County, and Greene County, is that now that this new guidance has come out regarding the potential for individuals to have to wear a mask if they are known to be exposed to somebody who is COVID positive. We already have a case in our county of a spouse of someone working in a summer school program who has come into contact. And what does that mean in terms of contact tracing? Right now, the rule from the CDC says you can still go to work, wear a mask, and get tested in 3 days. That's different. We don't know how that will impact contact tracing. We expect that now that the uptick is occurring, that contact tracing will be a requirement. What the guidelines for that will be, we don't know. And we're going to be communicating with Craig and the county to try to get clarification. To end my comments, I would just say that I firmly believe that under any circumstances moving into September, that we will have to be in person full-time K through 12. And within the guidance, once it's available, everyone will be working to make that happen. Issues regarding whether students have to wear masks or not, issues regarding social distancing, how the cafeterias will run, all of those things need to be sorted out, and they will be done within the guidance with input from our stakeholders, including our board. But we need to get that guidance. But it is my intent to have full in-person learning K through 12. I don't believe that the students need anything but that to address the academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs that we're planning to address through the additional resources that the board has approved. So as soon as we get the guidance, as soon as we know more, we'll continue to communicate with the board, our parents, our staff, and we will put our plans together. That's all I have on that.
Jeff, just a question. In the county health department meeting, is there concern about the return to school? Was there any conversations about, the governor made some comments today that were a little interesting in his press conference about schools and super spreaders and things like that. Any comments on the county level on that?
Not specifically about the governor's comments today. What the governor said today was hard to interpret.
Yeah.
He said that schools are going to have to be more aggressive if they don't want a super spreader event in September. And we don't know what he's referring to when he says we should be more aggressive. Going back to all the protocols that we put in place last year, we didn't have any evidence that any cases of COVID-19 were spread within the schools. Is he referring to schools doing more to promote vaccination? We don't know if he means that. We have made all of our community members aware of vaccinations. For example, today, the county brought a vaccination van over to Stewart's and is continuing to do that. So access to vaccinations in our counties is not a problem. And when we have surveyed our parents, the interest in having a school-based vaccination clinic was very, very low. And I think in part because we have access.
Yeah.
People can go up the Hudson Valley over to Albany and go to their pharmacy, or they can go to one of the locations that the Rensselaer County Department of Health is bringing the mobile vaccination clinic. So we don't know what is meant by that. In conversations with the county, one of the things that is under discussion right now is counties, not school districts, but counties have received very large grants to help schools stay open fully, and portions of those grant monies are going to be allocated to each district in Rensselaer County. And in order to use that money, there has to be a testing component. Whether or not we're going to be required to have a testing component, I don't know, because the guidance isn't here. But we have indicated as a district that when we implemented testing on a voluntary basis, for example, for our athletic programs, we thought it was well organized, very beneficial, but we had very low levels of consent.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know whether or not large numbers of families would consent to have their children tested in school. They're talking about two different types of testing: surveillance testing, which would be a certain percentage of your students and staff being tested on a regular basis as a preventative measure. Another idea that I kind of like is point of care testing, where in the event, remember last year we had students out as many as 5, 7, 9, 10 days of school because they were either awaiting a COVID test result or they needed resolution of symptoms or an alternative diagnosis. Point of care testing would involve a rapid test that takes 15 minutes. Questar would purchase the machines with the grants. If a student is symptomatic and it's their allergies, we could test the student, wait 15 minutes. If it's negative, they can go back to class. They don't have to go make a physician's appointment. They don't have to be out of school. They don't have to have tutoring arranged. So that concept we're exploring, and I kind of like that idea to keep the kids in school and learning, because we do have a lot of kids that were symptomatic last year and had to be out of school. But we're not clear at either the county level or the state level whether or not testing will be required or be considered to be an alternative that we could utilize to keep kids in school.
Excellent.
And those are some of the conversations that we're having.
And as far as, the statewide rate for vaccinations seemed to be about 75%. And I know this region's always been much higher than the statewide. Do we have a sense where our staff are in terms of percent?
I don't have specific data on staff, but I believe that our staff is fairly high. When we did survey early on in the vaccination, I do have student data that our COVID coordinator is finalizing. I would say in general, for those students that are eligible, generally from 6th grade, some in 6th grade through 12th grade, mostly 7th grade through 12th grade, it's in the 60%.
That's great.
Ranges between 60,
But
high 50s and high 60s, depending on the grade level.
which may be a critical part of getting the 7-12 group in full-time. And,
Yep.
and I agree with Mr. Simons that full-time seems to be what we got to do. And
Gonna
I think, the resources that we have from the federal funding probably will have to be used and set aside for some of those,
Yep.
those things that we have to do. So any other general comments regarding this issue? Again, waiting guidance. Hopefully something comes out soon. Been saying that for 3 weeks.
Question from public.
Oh. We don't know really.
We don't know. We don't know what the guidance is going to say. We're assuming that it'll be 3 feet, potentially 3 feet with masks. And we've asked for flexibility regarding lunches and cafeterias so that we can make sure that we can serve the kids.
Yeah, I mean, transportation, lunches, and those kinds will be the bigger issues in terms of how we can do the distancing and.
But I think it'll
within
be,
school.
I think it'll be 3 feet.
So we'll try. Anyone else? Comments or questions? All right. More to come, I'm sure. The next item is something we've been talking about is the status of pre-K planning.
Yes. By way of review, the district received universal pre-K grant monies this year totaling, Linda, help me, $583,000 in discussions with our board and a committee that we formed to look at pre-K. We determined that the most reasonable way and effective way, given the short timeline to go out for, would be to go out to community-based providers for an RFP. We received a number of calls and inquiries regarding the RFP from various agencies, but the date closed today. We only received a proposal from one agency that can serve approximately 30 to 40 students. One of the factors that some of the individuals who operate community-based programs brought to our attention was that they would really love to work with the East Greenbush School District, but the shortage of childcare workers. They felt that in order to fulfill the need, they would not have the people to be able to hire. Secondly, the short turnaround time. And we are limited under the state's funding to spend $5,400 per child to service 108 children. There is no flexibility regarding the use of that UPK money. In other words, we couldn't use that money to pay more for a community provider. That $5,400 per child is lower than most agencies' actual costs to run those programs and service those additional children. So that is a big constraint and factor that has affected, I think, the number of people who responded to the RFP. I have started some discussions with Questar BOCES about an alternative in addition to perhaps looking at this RFP and awarding it, which we have to decide, would be to have Questar, which does currently operate UPK programs in 4 or 5 sites, I think 1 or 2 in this county, operating a program. If Questar were to operate a program, we would have to determine the location within our district, and it would likely be Red Mill, and likely be 2 classes that could be supported because they have the available rooms. We're still working through what that would cost. Linda has prepared some information that we will have the board take a look at. And we could use the American Recovery Plan monies, which have not been fully allocated yet, if the board chose to to offset the UPK monies to meet the actual cost that BOCES charges right now for a UPK program. And we're still trying to figure that out a little bit. Linda's had some conversations with their business office, Jen Mulligan. I've had a meeting with Gladys Cruz and Anthony Taby to talk about it. So we'll bring all this information to the pre-K committee. And it doesn't mean we have to start it on September 9th either. We could plan it further and maybe start in October should we decide to go in both directions, granting the award, the RFP to the agency that submitted the RFP and going with BOCES so we could serve more kids. It's all under discussion right now.
Okay. Any questions from the board on the UPK? No? I know the challenge for this again was that sustainability of these programs long-term would mean probably an infusion of district funds to make it actually viable. And then long-term, how sustainable is that? You know, we all want to provide the best for our community for that age group, but again, at what cost for the community in terms of supporting a UPK program? And if you do 2 classes, that's, you know, what, 40 kids?
Yep.
36 kids. So that's just a fraction of the population. So it's how do you pick? And then how do you do a lottery system? And then that's rough. So I appreciate the pre-K committee looking into that. And
UPK is not BOCES aidable.
it's not,
That,
okay. So it's
that we
not,
were informed of. We can't get reimbursement through BOCES aid on UPK. But we are permitted under the American Recovery Plan to use that money for pre-K and early childhood.
so it could be something that we decide to do a couple years, and then it's preparing our students for that kindergarten, at least during a period of time where they maybe weren't able to get any early services as children. So,
Exactly.
all right. So that concludes our discussion items. Regular business, moving on, approval of programs for resident children with disabilities. Any questions or comments on that? Need a motion to approve that? Joanne, second. Michelle, all those in favor? Approved. And welcome, Frank. Thank you. Glad you could make it. The committees on preschool special education, resolution to approve the committee membership. Yes, we missed it on our organizational. That's my mistake. Sorry. Deanna, second. Kathleen, all those in favor? Approved. Moving on to committee reports. I see a lot of data here from the Marissa. So Marissa, we'll turn it over to you on the school safety and educational climate.
Thank you, Mr. Bino. Each year, a school district is required to submit a state report indicating the school safety and educational climate incident counts. So we submitted our report to the New York State Education Department on July 20th, 2021. What I did was I compared the incidents for the 2020-21 school year, compared that to 2019-20. In this last school year, 2020-21, there were 10 incidents reported across all schools in district. In 2019-20, there were 22 incidents. It's reasonable to conclude that the decreased amount of violent and disruptive incidents was largely due to the hybrid learning model, where our students were every other day, and following those safety and health protocols that were in place during the pandemic. So on that data sheet that's pulled up, you'll notice that there were 3 instances of weapon possession. One instance was at DPS. A student had brought in a bullet. This resulted in in-school suspension. We did make sure that that student did not have access to any weapons. At golf, there was a student that brought in a knife that resulted in an out-of-school suspension. And the third incident was at Columbia High School. A student had brought in pepper spray accidentally. That individual didn't realize what it was. The parents had put that on the keychain. Both the family and the student were very apologetic. No disciplinary action needed to occur based on that. But it is one of the reasons we revamped that weapon definition in our code of conduct. For the material incidents of discrimination, harassment, and bullying, excluding cyberbullying, there were 2 incidents. This involved 2 special education students that were harassing a peer. And the 5 cyberbullying incidents were student-to-student conflict over social media, which resulted in in-school suspension. Does anyone have any questions about that data?
I think the interesting thing is the cyberbullying piece. I mean, it sounds like that's obviously with kids being home and being remote and more use of social media and other access to technology. That number really didn't shift. It's actually, I'm surprised it's not higher. But again, there's probably things that we don't or aren't aware of because kids weren't in school.
Right.
But I just think that education, returning to school, that piece of it, that component is an important part of learning. We've had presentations in the past about the importance of safety online, and I think maybe even some more emphasis in our schools about cyberbullying and the impact that has. It will be critical as we return to school as well.
Right. We have had our SROs providing some of that, doing workshops and doing lessons on that over the last few years. Our health teachers address it in health curriculum. I know at the middle school, a couple of years, we brought in investigators that specialize in investigations of cyber posts and those kinds of things. And we've had some parent sessions, and we hope to continue to do those kinds of things. It's a growing problem across the country that kids tend to do these things online. We do have tools, and I think some of our families and students are getting aware that we do have tools to monitor during the instructional day what kids are getting into online. We have a product called Go Guardian that gives us an alert if there's something that's posted that we ought to investigate. Mark?
When we filed this report in referring to weapons, is it the definition listed in the report that if it's this, it's considered a weapon? Because certain things that, and I'll provide you with some more information, there's certain things that we're listing as weapons that under the New York State consolidated laws and the penal law are not considered weapons unless there's an age group involved and it's under 16. So I just want to make sure that we're properly saying, using the right terms in the right places so as to, if there's an incident involving one of these things, that, because you can't call the police because it's not considered a weapon. To make sure that we're properly defining it under, is it education law that says this is what a weapon is? Are we basing it off of the penal law, and any other New York State consolidated laws? Because they are very specific as to what we can call a weapon and what we can't. But there is sections where we can list things under imitation weapons. The air guns, the BB guns, the paintball guns, but they're considered imitation weapons, not weapons. So I just want to make sure that we're in the code of conduct as well. And that's why when we reported the pepper spray here, what definition is that listed on that report as being a weapon? Is it under?
It's reported in weapons, and it's just classified as other. So there's firearms, knives, and then just a category of other.
Right. So I just want to be very careful that pepper spray under New York State law, is pepper spray considered a weapon? I don't believe
Education law, and I'll have to research it more specifically. There, under education law, under this Vader, which is now called something different, there was a glossary of classifications that were based on education law, and in some cases they weren't congruent with penal law. I do know, because I participated in the New York State task force with the state ed department, that these definitions have been being looked at, and in some cases they are intending to shift some of the definitions to be more congruent with penal law. So,
I just want to make sure what we're recording is in fact that, is pepper spray, again, under New York State law, is not considered a weapon. So I just want to make sure that we're reporting properly, and that when we list in things in our code of conduct to say, hey, we're calling the police because this person had a weapon, and then all of a sudden the police get here and say, well, under the law, that's not considered a weapon.
That's a good point.
So we can't charge the person with a weapon. But if it's listed correctly, again, the air guns and things like that, they're only illegal for persons under the age of 16. So I just want to make sure that what we're putting down is correct,
Yep.
so that if we have one of those incidents with that stuff, that, you know, we can properly follow through with that.
Yep. I understand. It's a good concern. Thank you.
Any other questions on the data?
Just to clarify that a little bit, again, I'm not on that particular committee. It'd be a simple thing to look at the glossary for
Mhm.
definitions under ed law, and the penal law has this section in the back. Compare the two and see where we stand even with the code of conduct.
I think that would be a great exercise. I think it would be good.
Very, 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 very simple.
Yeah. The conversation that the state was having this year was related to not weapons, but it was more about triggers to investigate abuse,
Mhm.
student-to-student abuse. For example, 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds that touch another kid. You know, does that fall under classification of sexual abuse that needs to be investigated by the law? We had state troopers on that committee that said, you know, no, it doesn't. Let's make the definition of something that's classified as sexual abuse consistent with the penal law. Those were the kinds of conversations that, you know, they're having at the state level as well. So,
Well, I think what's interesting in this conversation, again, it's we as a local board are constantly at crossroads with the state mandates and information not matching and trying for us to try to find out. And as we go into this fall, this is going to be one of our biggest hurdles, is trying to keep the will of our community in sync with the will of the state. And the will of the state is not very clear at times, whether it's the penal law, educational law, masks, vaccinations, all this stuff we have going forward. So I think that it's going to be, you know, at what point do we really get to set the pace
Right.
for our
right.
community?
Right.
And I think our Waterloo is coming.
Yeah, I think local decision-making kind of went by the wayside in the last year and a half. And I think that
Yeah,
depending on how things are moving
Sure.
forward, we need to, you know, we're empowered as a board and to oversee the affairs and the policies of the school community here in East Greenbush. And it'd be nice to have that ability again,
I'm
right?
sure Mr. Simons would love to be the spearhead of these challenges.
That's
I
right.
would.
Good conversation.
Local control. I miss local control.
Well, we're going to wrestle it back. Right?
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you for the conversation on that item. Next item, Linda, the BRAC Long Range Planning Meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. The BRAC committee met last Monday, July 19th. We had representatives from Sano Rubin as well as March Associates, our architects present. They reviewed phase 2 and phase 3. That's work going on this current summer and next summer in our $39.7 million project. We also talked about, because there were favorable bids that came in, we found that we are able to go out with more bids and do some additional work that we originally had to take off the table. So Mr. Bickle, our facilities director, reviewed that with the committee. We also talked about the transportation emergency fuel tank project, where we're at with that. March Associates are still working on the drawings for that. And we did have a preliminary estimate provided to us regarding the soil remediation, which is quite a high number. We also talked about future projects and the fact that we're going to have a building condition survey done this year, and how we will use the building condition survey along with the improvement plan on the athletic fields to come up with a project for the future. And finally, we talked about a meeting that we had with the town of East Greenbush regarding what's called the Gilligan Road Sidewalk Project. And we didn't have much to report on that other than there is another meeting scheduled for August 4th, which we will be attending. Are there any questions? Thank you.
I think I had an opportunity to attend that meeting as well. I think Cheryl and Joanne were there, and it was excellent information sharing. And I'm looking forward to when we get the discussion about the building condition survey and not just fixing things, but bringing out some new things in the future and maybe some technology spaces and things like that. So very good. Moving on our agenda, Mr. McHugh is not present. I see that he's on vacation and nothing to report, I assume.
Nothing.
And Mr. Simons?
I do not have any committee reports.
Very good. Next item is table motions. I don't have anything. Old business, board members, anything that I may have missed? No? Okay. Moving on to item 13, our consent agenda. We have several items here. We have several instructional, non-instructional items. Any questions or comments on those items? Which one, Joanne? Item B. And Deanna, you had a question? Same, so item B. Just making sure we still have a quorum. We do, we will. Okay, any other questions regarding the items, the personnel items and the other consent items? No, very good. I need a motion to approve all items except for item B. Kathleen, second Frank, all those in favor? Approved. Moving on to item B, I need a motion to approve that. Mark, second. John, all those in favor? All those abstaining? Deanna and Joanne? Approved. Thank you. We also have an addendum. I know that the HR department and the departments have been very busy filling those positions that we approved, and these items came after the agenda was posted, but they are on as addendum. Any questions on those two items? No? Need a motion to approve those? Kathleen, second Joanne. All those in favor? Approved. Next item is for the board is new business. Any? Kathleen, need a microphone?
Okay, last week I attended the New York State School Boards Association Summer Law Conference on the reopening of schools. And just to report back really quickly, we're going to be busy. They spent quite a bit of time on some of the law changes for special education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They also looked a lot into what they're figuring are going to be some of the challenges coming up with the students coming back as far as mental health. It's, you know, as they were talking, I think we have started, you know, moving in the right direction. Their recommendation is keep going that way. One of the takeaways that I came up with is, especially with the mental health, they talk about building community relationships and really working with staff wellness. So as we look at the students, we also need to be looking at our community and our staff because they're going to be the ones supporting all the students.
Yeah.
So as we go forward, that would definitely be something I would consider. They brought up the New York State law that our special education students now have, it was passed as a law, I think it's Zachary's law, that our special education students that would have aged out of the program at 21
23.
now have the potential of 2 extra years to finish their course of study. And so that may be impacting us, and that may be something we'll have to keep in mind. But, you know, I know it's something that we already know about. They gave me a whole book for you, Mr. Simon, since you weren't able
And I'm
to
sorry
come.
that I canceled at the last minute on you.
Yes, I
It's
guess
not-
it's understandable.
I was in water in my basement.
Yeah. One of the things they also talked about were laws that were passed by both houses that are awaiting action by the governor. And I happened to have lunch with a gentleman from the Bethlehem School District who works in the legislature. And I said, okay, so these are all passed. What's really going to happen? He says, they're all going to get signed. I said, okay, good to know. One of the ones that he was talking about that I think we're going to have to look at is an open meetings law definition. And they're looking at some of our committees may now be under the open meetings law if we have a large majority of board members on a committee, probably like the policy committee. We may have to be looking at those being subject to an open meetings law.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
that's something that we should definitely be looking into. They talked, like I said, it's a really thick book here, and I tried to kind of highlight a couple things here. They talked about negotiations, talked about tenure, how that was affected by the fact that they couldn't do APPR evaluations again, but it sounds like we have all of that under control already. I think that was most of it, but like I said, I'll give you your book, Mr. Simons, and you can go through it carefully and see what I missed.
Thank you, Mrs. Curtin. I appreciate that. I appreciate you attended that. Important.
Thank you for going to that, Kathleen, and getting the update. Since we have our PPS director and assistant director, any comments on the special ed law that extends and any transition, like plans and? Okay. Good.
Sorry, could you hear that first part?
No, go ahead.
We have 3 students who are impacted by that. I've connected with all 3 families, and 2 families have adult services in place and would like to pursue that. And
Very
1 family is on a wait list for an adult service day hab program and is holding out hope for that and will contact us if
they
that
need it.
doesn't
Okay.
go through.
Very good. Thank you, Molly. Any other new business for the board members? No? Now moving to our second public forum. Anybody have any comments or questions from the public? No? Last chance? Okay. Moving to our second board forum. I'll start on my right with Frank. Good. Joanne? Kathleen? Deanna? Mark? John? Good. Michelle? Good. And Cheryl. Just a couple comments. I had an opportunity to go to a webinar today by Thomas C. Murray, and I just want to share a slide that I thought was a great quote. Give him credit. Our what and our how may have changed, but our why hasn't. And I think that's really important as we consider opening and what we do as educators and as a board member. And again, the why the kids hasn't changed. It's how we do things and how we're going to do things in the future that will shift, but we'll do the best we can and do what's great for our students. The other thing, Michelle and I had a long conversation not too long ago about some of the things we'd like to do in line with what you said, Kathleen, about community events and wellness, and I shared those with Mr. Simons. And I think, I want the school year to open up with a real positive vibe and get kids involved and community involved, and how important that will be, like you said, Kathleen, to bring in everyone who's going to participate in this process because it infects everybody, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, younger children, all families in our community are part of our school community, and they contribute to our school community. And I think it's important that we not only do that to start the school year, but sustain it even in those dark times like we experienced last year in winter when things were really rough, that we got to continue to focus on the positive, recognize what is important, and also to make sure that we don't lose that momentum and that positivity that we start the school year with. And, regardless of what the governor and the state throws us, we have to be there for our kids and our families. So Kathleen, grab the microphone.
Yeah, as you said it made me think of something that they said. They talked about on that opening day and that opening time with your teachers. One school district did, I think it was last fall, but they did small groups of teachers where the teachers could kind of sit around and just kind of debrief with each other in a small group and kind of start building relationships there, so that when things get a little rough, when it gets a little dark, they have their little group that they can go back to instead of just the big group. And the people there felt it was easier to
Yeah.
share. Queensbury, they also talked about, they've taken an old bus and repurposed it for community use, and that's kind of where they have a lot of their community resources in an old bus, so it's now mobile, so they can go to different areas and do different things.
neat.
So they've repurposed an old bus for that.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome.
I did do some follow-up when Mr. Buno talked to me about those 2 issues, student and community engagement at the beginning of the year and throughout the year, to kind of make up for some of the loss of social activities that have been the tradition in East Greenbush. And I had a meeting with the principals last week, and we reviewed their budgets that they are provided to bring in extra activities, guest speakers, and those kinds of things. And I told them that the board was genuinely concerned about making sure that the social reconnection to each other and to schools and community that has always characterized East Greenbush occurs this year. And we want not only the traditional calendar of events, but if there are other things that you want to do together, like every elementary school doing something different, or middle school and high school doing something different, we want you to submit those ideas. And if we need to supplement our budgets with the monies that we have available, that's a priority. And so they were all on board with it. They're starting to look into activities and discussing those kinds of things. The other thing that I'm currently doing, and I've only began to consider it, you know that we have agreed with the county to put in a mental health clinic, satellite clinic, 1 day a week at the middle school. Based on some of the discussions that we've had, there's a feeling that addition, and including the social work that we're adding to the and counselors that we're adding at the middle school level, may not be sufficient to address some of the mental health needs of the students, particularly at the high school. So we are internally, Mr. Harkin, myself, Molly McGrath, looking at the caseloads of our current social workers at the high school, the roles and responsibilities of our county prevention specialist, and determining whether or not we hire another one of our own social workers. And I asked Marissa to post that in anticipation of need, or whether we do something different and some kind of a contractual service to be brought into the school, such as some of the BOCES can provide a partnership with agencies such as Parsons and those kinds of things to come in. So we're looking at both options: contract out, possibly structure something different with the county, or hire our own person. But we want to look at caseloads, needs, and what everybody does. Okay? Because the county contract is really drug and alcohol prevention. It's not necessarily going to get at the root of some of the needs that the kids have. But I did appreciate that feedback, and I am working on something. One of the other things that was sparked in this conversation was performing arts. We had at one time performing arts COSER. I'm familiar with the performing arts COSER that can bring in, so some names of people that used to come in, do nice things to engage the kids, came up at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. They're kind of looking at the programs that Questar has access to bring in people to really, engage the kids and get the kids excited about coming back to school. Other things we're doing, just real briefly, board mentioned playground. I have Sam Beardsley and Paul Bickle doing an evaluation of our current playgrounds to make sure that we had a sense of what needs to be repaired or replaced, or what the full cost of replacing those would be. And I haven't forgotten about community violence prevention, and I'm thinking about that issue. And I want to talk to Mark a little bit more about that.
Okay.
So all those items are still on our list to do.
Great. And I think, I encourage the administration and the principals to work with their PTOs and really stretch themselves in terms of that welcome back and those events. And I think it'll be really important. So they have our full support to move forward and get creative. Let us know what you need.
I will.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes our board meeting. We do have a need for an executive session. We don't anticipate any board business after the executive session. So with that, I need a motion to move into executive session. John, second. Michelle, all those in favor? All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.